Some of this stuff is old news. I've been reporting on polling in my columns and in past lives for a long time. One of the things that I've noted regularly has been, first of all, on the politics of it, that there is a difference in both parties between rank and file and leadership. The Democratic voters appear to be more pro-trade than Democratic politicians. And right now, I suppose you could say there's less of a difference on the Republican side between the politicians and the Republican voters. But that has a lot to do with where their support comes from. A lot of Democrats, not so much financial, but organizational support, get out the vote, driving people to polls, things like that, comes from organized labor, which is trade skeptical. The Republican support often comes from the business community, which tends to be more pro-trade. But, I've thought about why politicians who are out of sync with their own party get away with it. And the reason is exactly what Scott said. If you ask people what the top three issues are facing the country right now, trade comes in last. It was 16 out of 16 in the Cato poll. It was 20 out of 20 in the Pew poll. And if you look at Pew's asked that question for at least 14 years. There was 1 year where trade moved up. For a while, they had a list of 8. And there was a 1 year when trade moved from number 8 to number 7. But that was 1 year. It's just not on people's radar. People have opinions about it. That was the other thing I was going to say, which is what fascinates me about this is cognitive dissonance, which is essentially the ability to have two conflicting views at the same time and not worry about it. So if you look at some of the tables farther down, not the top line tables in the Cato study, one that I found very interesting was, do you agree or disagree with the following statement? Okay, 77% of Americans agreed that Americans shouldn't be allowed to trade with people in countries that allow unsafe and unfair working conditions to persist. 68% of Americans said that U.S. citizens should be free to buy and sell to mostly anyone in the world without government interference. So these are 68% and 77% of the same people, okay? 65% agreed that people in other countries are stealing American technology when we trade with them. 63% agreed that globalization and trade with other countries has hollowed out the American middle class. 61% agreed that Americans are getting cheated by U.S. trade agreements with other countries. 61% said the U.S. becomes richer and safer as its people trade with people in countries throughout the world. And 55% said U.S. trading with China helps increase global stability and peace. Again, these are the same people, all right? And no one seems to notice that they are reflecting views that are entirely contradictory. I was also intrigued by a table that asks sort of a trade-related question, which is, are you in favor of subsidies or giving money to selected sectors? And it was interesting there that there was a bit of a split on which sector you're talking about. So for all the farmers out there that listen to us, you win. 62% of the people polled thought that subsidies to agriculture were a good idea. And then the fall off is sharp. 52% manufacturing, 48% green tech, 42% automobiles, and at the bottom of the pile, 36% for oil and gas. So, which has not been reflected in our politics, which continues to strongly support oil and gas subsidies. Another interesting example of, I would say, less cognitive dissonance and hypocrisy. One of the more interesting questions that Cato asked was, under what circumstances would you support a tariff on blue jeans? And so if they were asked that question, do you just favor a tariff on blue jeans without any mention of what the price impact would be? 62% said yes, they would support it. But when you ask, would you support a tariff if it made blue jeans $5 more expensive? Only 58% said yes. And then the great divide. If it made blue jeans $10 more expensive, only 34% would support a tariff. And if it made a pair of blue jeans $25 more expensive, only 19% would support that. So there's some logic to that. In the sense that, the higher the price goes, the less likely you are to buy it. That's basic economics. But you start out with, again, the same people saying, in general, 62% would support more tariffs. But then when you start talking to them about exactly what that means in practical terms, they tend to have a different view. The poll also brought out Pew dealt with partisan differences. The Cato poll spent a little bit more time on demographic differences, and they had one interesting one on education, which has been done before and reveals no surprises, but it's worth mentioning. The question was, is it better to manufacture and make everything that we need inside the United States? Or should we adopt comparative advantage, focus on what they make best and buy their stuff for what they make best? And people with a high school education or less, 64% said we should make everything here, and only 36% said we should buy from the people that make the best stuff. But if you go to the other end of the education scale, which would be postgraduates, 55% said we should buy from other countries, and 45% said we should make everything here, which is interesting. That's a rather high number and a higher number than in the past, but it still is reflective of, there's a difference of opinion based on education. Another piece of cognitive dissonance is they ask a very interesting question. Americans care about global poverty. 75% of the people are concerned about global poverty. 83% say reducing global poverty would improve stability in the most dangerous parts of the world and make us safer. 74% say one of the best things the U.S. government can do for the world's poor is to let Americans freely trade with them, which doesn't square with what they've said before. And then I'll close with what I thought was really the funniest, which they ask about, would you support a tariff on television sets if Joe Biden proposed it? And would you support a tariff on television sets if Donald Trump proposed it? And here I'm embarrassed to say the Democrats didn't do very well. 57% of Democrats said they would support the tariff if Biden proposed it, and only 35% said they'd support it if Trump proposed it. Same tariff. Republicans were a little bit more consistent. 51% said they would support it if Biden did it. 70% said they would support it if Trump did it. So at least they're both in the plus column, but there's still a difference. 49% said they'd oppose it if Biden proposed it. There is a kind of an odd partisan element to this, which we've seen on other issues on numerous occasions. Republicans, for example, opposing things in the Obama administration and then turning around and supporting them when proposed them, and then turning around again and opposing them when Biden proposed them. There is a political element in all of this. So I think that Scott covered the politics of this a little bit. So I think I will stop there.